So I got a surprising amount of views on the video I made about going to Mexico, and it's been long enough. You guys probably want to know the story. So about a year ago, I went to Mexico for work. I was going to a conference on penguins and penguin husbandry in Guadalajara, Mexico, at the zoo there in Guadalajara. Now, I'm originally from San Antonio and took a lot of Spanish in middle and high school. So I am not fluent in Spanish by any sense of the imagination, but I can apparently get enough Spanish and understand enough Spanish to get along in Mexico. It was my experience that, especially once I was in Guadalajara and at the conference, a lot of people there spoke pretty fluent English or spoke enough English that with my bad Spanish and their bad English, we could communicate in some fashion, especially when you're not strangers and you've been at the conference for several days with some of these people. So I went to this penguin conference. There was a few different zookeepers from various zoos in the United States. There was a few presenters that were pretty big names in the penguin world. One of them was Linda Henry. She was one of the really experienced people that worked with SeaWorld in San Diego in the early days. So she had a lot of stories from SeaWorld in the 80s, in the early 80s even. She was able to answer some questions I had about historical penguin husbandry stuff. There was a vet from SeaWorld San Diego as well. And then there was a lot of people from Mexico. Obviously, there was all the zookeepers for their zoo that were there. There was also some keepers from Veracruz and a few people from Chile that were there. I think it was a vet from Chile who worked with some of the rehab birds there of the Humboldts, which is what I work with. There's also a lot of veterinary people, so you had a lot of like wildlife rehabbers and various vets and vet students from the Jalisco region in Mexico. I think that was kind of the gist of who was there, but it was several days, and I didn't get to spend a whole lot of time outside of the zoo in Guadalajara, but explored a little bit. So this video is going to be about traveling to Mexico and just kind of being in Guadalajara itself. I have been outside of the country, but I've never been outside of the country to a place that didn't speak English as the primary language. Been to Canada a couple times, been to the Bahamas. Grew up in San Antonio, obviously, so sort of aware of Mexican culture a little bit, but obviously that's Mexican-American culture. It's not completely congruous, but yeah, so brushed up on some Spanish on the flight with like a Spanish for Dummies book from the library that I ended up ruining and had to pay for a little bit, but brushed up a little bit on the flight there, and then I was basically good to go. There was, it's not taxi service, but there was a travel company's name I'm forgetting right now that my boss booked for transporting between the airport and the hotel. She asked if I wanted to rent a car there, and there was like enough stuff going on about, you know, traveling outside the country, not being fluent in the language, never having been to Mexico before at all. So I figured that was one less thing to worry about, is trying to get a rental car and do all that other stuff. So the trip there was kind of intimidating for a few reasons. Obviously, there's the language barrier. I haven't traveled by plane in quite a long time, so it's not like I could hear that well after going on the plane. The customs person coming off of the plane in New Mexico was like just trying to ask where I was coming from, and I couldn't understand what he was saying. Partially through the language barrier, but also just partially because I couldn't hear him. Eventually, I was like, "Oh yeah, I came from Dallas," and he's like, "Okay," and he stamped the thing and moved on. One intimidating thing about traveling there was that you got the TSA in the United States, and I don't know if they're armed or not. They never seem like they're armed, but the people checking you through when you get into Mexico were just straight up like wearing army fatigues. They're like actual soldiers, is what it seems like. They're armed, like, you know, the Mexican travelers are taking them very seriously. And there's a few things that you didn't have to speak much Spanish to understand that he wanted you to take your hat off. And and you were definitely going to listen to what this armed man had to say. When I got there into the Guadalajara airport, it seemed like the area for arrivals was like under, looking back, it seems like it was under construction. So you get there and it's like really drab and there's kind of like nothing there, and it just seems like this like kind of like empty building or whatever. When I'm coming back, I realized that like, oh yeah, like the arrival section is under renovation. Like the upstairs area where you're departing is just like a normal ass airport with like, you know, a chocolate shop and like various things with like decor and stuff like that. But when you get there, it's like, okay, you're like, okay, I'm in Mexico. I speak bad Spanish, and this looks like kind of a dump. What's happening? And then you realize like, oh no, it was just under renovation. But go from the airport to the hotel, strike up a conversation with the driver. She says, oh, Spanish is pretty good, but she makes a restaurant recommendation. You're driving across the city, and it seems like kind of by the airport is maybe not the best part of town, which frankly is kind of similar for a lot of cities in the United States. But get to the hotel, they like don't have the card on file that I'm supposed to use from the workplace, so I end up having to use my credit card, and of course it like just immediately maxes it, right? So the next few days, as they figure out the situation with work, I am using the dwindling monies on my debit card. Luckily, they get that through. But there was like a hot second where it was like, well, I'm in Mexico and I'm almost out of money, so that's cool. But they figured it out. The hotel was in an area of town called it's kind of close to a place called Providencia. I'm not sure if that's the official neighborhood name, but that part of town seems to be like very touristy. So there was a lot of big hotels along that strip. There's a mall by the hotel and restaurants and stuff in that touristy Providencia area. Talking with people at the conference, they were like, oh yeah, that is fine. I wouldn't worry about it. But there was some things that were a little bit intimidating just in Mexico that weren't the same as the United States, in that like you'd have these like high-rise fancy hotels, you know, down the street from like a car dealership, like an official car dealership that looks pretty fancy and new. And there'd be construction sites in between you and them, or between the hotels. And like every single one of them has just like barbed wire, razor wire, like all around it. And, you know, in the United States, we usually equate that with like an area of danger or an area you need to be concerned about. And it just traveling through Guadalajara, it seemed like that was pretty common. If it was a construction site, it would have the wire up just to make sure that everything was accounted for, I guess. So that was something to, like, you know, there was a point in time where I was walking like from the hotel to the upscale mall, and you'd be passing razor wire, and you're like, I don't know, Americano brain or whatever would be like, well, I'm a little nervous about that. And then you'd walk past like a chocolate shop, and you'd be like, yeah, no, I don't need to worry about this at all. So the weather there was pretty warm. I think that time of the year in like early winter for Guadalajara is a good tourist time, in that the weather's nice. You go from like 50 at night to 80 in the daytime pretty consistently, but it's not peak tourist season. You don't have like the warm weather, the good weather, even though it was pretty good coming from like ice storm down there last year. And it's not like the religious tourism season or pilgrimage season. So if one was going to Mexico, apparently that would have been a good time. Apparently rates were good enough too. My boss was like, wow, yeah, that's way cheaper than we thought. Like, I didn't think I was going to go on this kind of like spur of the moment conference thing. And then they realized how cheap it was. And it was like, oh yeah, I mean, here's whatever the cost is. Go to Mexico and learn how to penguin better. So the area I was in looked pretty affluent. There was only a couple of places I was able to go to, because you're at the zoo most of the day for the conference, and the zoo's like across the city, not particularly close. You go in there, shuttle bus, and there were only a couple things within walking distance. At one point near the end, I wanted to go to the El Centro, which was like the historic center section of the city. And the people I was with that were there for the conference, the Americans were like kind of like maybe not feeling that so much. And they asked the clerk at the front desk, "You're like, is the El Centro safe at night?" And the clerk was like, "Yeah, no." I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, there goes that." I didn't get to go to many places that were like authentic or whatever, but I went to the Midtown Mall, walked there, and it was very weird to like be in Mexico and go to like an upscale Mexican mall and look around and be like, well, this is nicer than like any mall in the city I live in, and like frankly, most of the ones that I've been to in the United States. It was mostly an open air mall because like, who cares? It doesn't snow there, and it doesn't rain particularly much either. So it was like some of it was enclosed, some of it was open. It looked pretty nice. There was a lot of nice restaurants in one part, and you could see a lot of people there on dates or whatever. There was a hotel attached that had like a helipad, and that was one way I told the people I was with. I was like, "Yeah, it's like right over there. You see that helipad? That's where we're going." Like I went there by myself one night, and then brought the other people there the next night. We ended up getting some Italian food at a restaurant there. But the other place that was nearby was the Providencia. More hotels, a bunch of restaurants. The driver when I got there recommended La Casa de los Platos. Platos? I can't remember. Um, that was really good. That was like excellent Mexican food. When I went there first night by myself, it was really, really great. And then trying to go back there with the other ones, they like didn't want to split the check at all. The we all came on zoo money basically, so we're trying to split the check so that we can get the reimbursement for the food. And for whatever reason, that restaurant didn't want to do it. Didn't want to split checks at all. We ended up going to a pizza place across the street where they did want to split checks, and then seemed to have a really hard time doing that. When we talked to one of the vet med students, that was just like she was basically fluent in English. Um, we told her about this situation, and she was like, "Yeah, that's not common in Mexico. That's not like a Mexican thing. I don't know if they're just being lazy or whatever." But so she didn't think that was a thing. But I would say in general, like, not that I went and got fast food. The options were either like the Providencia area, the mall, or within walking distance, or go to there was a lounge in the hotel at like the 12th floor, which was the top of that building, but there were several things on top of that weren't part of the same building, even though the fire escapes were the same. But anyway, top of the hotel, which was not top of the building, was like the 12th floor at a sky lounge. It had a pool, a sky pool, and like a bar. You could order food, and there were seats and everything else. That was, the easy place to get food if you were worried about like wandering outside the hotel at night. Whether it was there or the other restaurants, like it seemed like dinner always took a while. It took a while to decide where to go, obviously, which is a very universal thing. Once you were there, like it took a while to get the food, it took a while to pay for the food. Like dinner was like always a process, whether it was in the Sky Lounge or whatever. So that seemed consistent. I don't know if the splitting checks was just like not something that particular restaurant wanted to do. It was an odd time to be in. It was I had like a lot of imposter syndrome when I was on this thing. So some of that was the zoo, but some of that was like just like being an American in Mexico, or somebody from the United States in Mexico at the time. Because like when I went, you know, I think I was coming back the day that President Trump wanted to start the tariffs with Mexico. I don't know if he ended up going through with it at the time, but like, you know, you'd be in Mexico and everyone's nice, and like, yeah, you know, it's a little nerve-wracking being in certain parts of Mexico. Not that we were in that many of them, but everyone's nice, and like, I think like I had trouble, like my zoo had trouble paying for the course at the conference, and by the end of the week, they were just like, yeah, whatever, it's fine. We'll just, you know, we won't charge you or whatever. And it was like, I really want them to pay for it, but they're like, you know, they didn't even. they didn't even take money for the course. Like everyone was very nice, and everyone I talked to was very friendly and wanting to, you know, putting up with my ability to not speak Spanish very well. And like you'd be in the breakfast area of the hotel, and CNN in Spanish was on, and like you know enough Spanish just to be like, yeah, well, there's they're talking about Trump and tariffs or like whatever the hell else he was doing at the time, and you're around all these people that like he said have been or like I don't know. Well, I mean, yet he's implying that people from Mexico or people being coming from Mexico were like criminals and terrible and all these things, and you're just surrounded by like nice people, intelligent people, qualified people, like people doing good jobs at the thing they're doing. Like the people that were running the conference were essentially the penguin keepers, right? So like what I mean running the conference, like one of the speakers was in charge of the penguin department. She was a vet and in charge of penguins. And like the people translating into English, because they've got like these headsets that will translate from English to Spanish or whatever, they're acting as translators. Like those are the penguin keepers. Like, so you had a crew of four, I think, and two or three of them were like translating. So basically being fluent in either language and doing their job and doing all these other things, and like they were just they were just really great. They presented on penguin training, and that penguin training was really impressive. And I told them, I was like, I mean, you guys are going to be like you guys are getting a lot of questions from other zoos in the Spanish speaking world, Latin America, for advice on penguins and penguin training, just because of like what you're doing right now. So it was very weird to be there in a place where the president was like vilifying the people, and like they're all just like really cool, right? It was also weird like pretending to be a rich person, like you're in a nicer hotel than like you're ever gonna I'm ever gonna afford in the United States, and obviously our dollars go further there, but also like yeah, you're like in the room and you're like, wow, this is really nice, and the food's really nice here, and you're getting shuttled around, and you accident like there was a one of the people there who was like involved in wildlife rehab asked me if I was going anywhere cool or doing any like vacation stuff while I was in Mexico, and I was like, no, they paid for the trip, and I don't really have a lot of money to like go sightseeing or whatever. And he was like, I mean, everything's cheap here. Like why aren't you gonna go do stuff? And it was like, yeah, I just don't have it. One of the people that was there from a zoo did have an extra day where she was going to go sightseeing, which was the smart thing to do. But there was kind of some confusion on how long the conference lasted anyway, which is how she got that extra day. I didn't have that extra day with the flights and everything. So it was weird pretending to be rich, going to like an expensive mall, getting shuttled around all these places. And I mean, I might be rich compared to Mexico because I accidentally figured out how much the commissary keepers got paid. We were in the commissary area where they were preparing the food, and they were like doing demonstrations on how to prepare fish for baby penguins and how to do some other like veterinary stuff on young penguins. And I asked, I don't know what he was, I don't know what his position was, but he seemed to be some kind of supervisor or like area director or the commissary and other stuff in the building in that area of the zoo. He was showing us stuff, and I knew enough Spanish to ask how many people worked in the commissary area like full time, and so I asked that, and then uh, I was asking the person in charge of education if they had figured out the check issue to pay for the course, because it was like the last day we were there. If they got the check from my zoo, or they processed the check from my zoo in the United States in order to pay for the course that I had essentially almost completed. And he began to answer the question of like how much they were paid, and he answered the question, and he was very cool about it. And I was like, that's very interesting, but I wasn't actually asking that question. I'm sorry. The answer was like I was paid, like I was on education leave, so I was paid more for that day than I think every full-time member of the commissary crew combined at that zoo. And he said that that was a pretty good rate for zookeepers and or zoo employees at a Mexican zoo. So it's not like they were being paid poorly for the scenario, but it just felt like so awkward and entitled and you know like not worthy to be paid that much money when you know they were paid so much less. And I'll talk about that in the video about the Guadalajara Zoo when it came to differences in American zoo or zoos in the United States and zoos in Mexico. But um, yeah, a lot of imposter syndrome. Felt like I didn't. I mean, everyone at that course is going because they need to learn more about their job, right? Like they're not doing their job as well as they would like to be doing. They've had some difficulties in penguin husbandry, so it wasn't just me; it was the whole room. Like when they talk about certain aspects that can be struggle when you're taking care of penguins, like everyone's phone is up taking pictures of that slide. Like that's just something that everybody fights, and I felt unified in that. But you feel the imposter syndrome of like you're supposed to know what you're doing, but you're there. You feel the imposter syndrome of you're pretending to be a rich person. Like their sky lounge, they had a sky lounge, right? I was like staying at a place with a sky pool. Like what am I doing? I'm used to barely barely livable hotel spaces, and I'm in this place with a sky lounge. Now you might be asking yourself, did I swim in that sky pool? And the answer is yes, of course I did, because when am I going to do that? When am I going to go back to Mexico and swim in a sky pool? When am I ever going to be in a sky pool? So yes, last night I put the shorts on that I brought and had swim trunks, and then I went and I swam in the pool for a few laps to be like, yes, I am here on this 11th or 12th floor of this fancy hotel in Mexico, which obviously the sunset was beautiful from that vantage point, and I'm here swimming. And I, of course, ate a whole bunch of tacos while I was in Mexico, and they were all great. Going back on the airport to the airport on the way back, and last meal there, you're like, I could get KFC, I could get whatever. Hell no, I'm going to go to the taco place, and I'm getting my last round of tacos, and they're going to be glorious. Obviously, the food was great. There's some kind of cactus flesh, I don't know, fries. Anyway, cactus flesh was great. There was always a good taco everywhere. They actually had tacos at the zoo. They were very cheap, and they were priced accordingly. I wouldn't necessarily recommend the zoo tacos, but I would prefer to be tacos at my zoo instead of chicken strips. But yeah, anything else to say about time in Mexico? I didn't get a chance to go get many souvenirs, but luckily I was able to get something at the airport for family and friends and whatnot. There wasn't a whole lot in the way of and I'll talk about this in the video. There wasn't a lot of in the way of gift shops at the zoo in comparison to a typical zoo in the United States. So very good time, very good experience. Being from San Antonio, I thought the foliage would be way smaller. Like if I look at pictures from my time in San Antonio, the trees are not big, maybe 20 feet or something. A lot of chaparral once you get south of that along the road to Corpus Christi. So I figured it'd be kind of more of that in Guadalajara. But no, a lot of big luscious trees everywhere. Trees I wasn't familiar with, all along the zoo, all along in other parts of the city. You'd be walking around on the street of Providencia, and there'd be big, crazy tree doing its thing, growing out of the sidewalk. So would recommend if you're traveling to go to Guadalajara. Very cool. I wish I would have been able to go see some more of the historic sites and stuff like that, but pretty neat. Your Spanish is probably better than you think it is when it comes to that. It didn't feel like I was that far from the US, honestly. My phone plan worked in Mexico. I never needed pesos since the cards just worked everywhere. So the cards worked everywhere. I always had the phone for like traveling or communicating. Um, it's not that far, and it's a pretty nice place to go.